everybody, welcome back, and today I want to tackle column names and column functions. Now, I'm going to preface this video before we get into it. If you're new to PowerFX, then that's fine, but this video is going to require you to have an intermediate knowledge of some sort of program or programming knowledge. In the link to the description below, I have a video that I created for JSON. What is JSON? Kind of describe it. Describe how it is, because this is going to use JSON heavily. Unfortunately, column names, column functions require something that's called an untyped object. And an untyped object is basically a blob of, or a generic placeholder to put a, the best way to describe it is basically when you're using APIs, APIs can give you a response back. And that response is usually a record. It could be a table of records. Anyway, the point is, inside of each record, there's a multitude of different data types, from integer to date to, whatever. And so that's why it's untyped. You can't just access it cleanly and directly. You got to go through a bunch of hoops. And I really struggled with this, so I struggled because I didn't know how to present this in a way that would make sense to everybody, because you almost need to have not only these functions, but you need to have a prerequisite knowledge of JSON and an understanding of untyped objects before you can even get to this point. So again, go look at the JSON video. Again, link in the description below if you need help with that. Otherwise, I'm going to trudge on through here. I'm going to assume that you already are familiar with the functions used. If I haven't covered them yet in this series, don't worry, I will cover them, but it's not necessarily going to be a whole lot of help trying to wrap your mind's eye around this particular area. This will be available for download, so you can have in my example to use and tear it apart if you so chose. And of course, most of the videos that I do find online on YouTube, they go typically to kind of a simple use case example, but I took this use case example and I amped it up a notch, because this is real world response. This is actually a sample response from OpenAI's documentation, and this is a response from OpenAI that you get back from their API. So I went ahead and ingrained and put that in here as a real world, more complicated example, so that we can kind of see what does this really look like, because this is just Mickey Mouse junk that you're seeing on screen. Very easy to wrap your mind's eye around based on the contrast of this. Okay, this is a little squirrely. This maybe not so much. All right, so let's look at this and just call out very simply. And now, if you do take and download my code, I need to make a call out here. So JSON looks like what you're seeing here. Unfortunately, in Power Apps, in order for me to put a default value, I have to put these single quotes in double quotes to escape the quotes. So don't go in here and just try to copy it out at face value, or you're going to run into all kinds of problems, because this is not real JSON. This is PowerFX escaping the the quotation. It really is supposed to look like you see it on screen right here. So if anything, double click in here, Control A and then Control C to copy it out of here, then you'll get proper JSON if you wanted to use it elsewhere. All right, so I'm taking a very simple record. So I'm not going to go into the full discussion that I do in JSON on that JSON video, but anytime you see these mustache curly braces, these are essentially depicting a record of inside the data, inside of the curly braces. And so it's a real simple record. I only have name and age. And so the simplicity of this is that David is a string, and you know this because of the quotes around here denoting that it's a string. This is just a numerical or integer value, and this is why it's an untyped object, because this object has both a string and an integer in here. Okay, so if we look at the button here, we'll see some functions going on this button. So let me click the button, and I'm going to show you column names and column functions, two of them, and I'm going to set and store them in a variable. And if I can get my cursor to work. Here we go. Let's fold this up. So at the bottom, we're using column names. At the top, you see we're using column. So what I'm doing is I'm capturing, so the real magic is this middle line. And if I were to format this similarly, I could say that the real magic is also this middle line. Let me put this one more back. Anyway, we'll put it like that. And then the magic is here. Now notice that I'm keeping and making variables. Now again, going back on tangent, I always label my variables with a V in front of it so that I know that these objects, when I run across them, anything with a V I know is a variable. So I've got VResponse1 and VResponse11 or VResponse11. And so I'm storing the return value that I get from these inside of these variables. So if I come over here to variables and look at global variables, I have a table blank, variable blank, text blank, table blank, right? And so the column will return essentially a single item. The column names returns a table. And the column names returns all of your column names, your first level, top level column names inside of an untyped object. So if you've got nested objects, which is what I do have here, you're not going to get it. A good example of a nested object. See, ID, let's just go through this real quick. I'm not going to get into the code, but I just want to show you first level and nested. So ID, object, created, model, system, and choices, or choices are all first level. But index, messages, these are second level. Okay, they're like the children of the parent whose choices. And it gets even worse right here. Messages, that also has a child, two children, role and content. So role and content are 3 levels or 3 layers deep into this onion. So again, when we're dealing with just this function called column names, you're only going to get back the first top level, first parent level column names as your output. So I'm going to push the Alt key and I'm going to run this button. And if we look at this, I get the response of 1, and then the data source for this table is response 11. Excuse me. And if we're looking here at the column, when you're dealing with a column, it wants essentially an untyped object. And so the untyped object in this example is the text that I have here in this text input box. Otherwise, you can just put raw JSON inside of here, and you'll probably be just fine. Again, you'll have to put your quotes and do all your stuff that PowerFX wants because you need to escape stuff. And from there, you basically just say, which column do I want to bring back? In this case, it's age. The other thing I want to say is that column really and only works in this context as the first level or the parent level. Remember I showed you that other example where we're going 3 layers deep down in the oven, onion, and we'll go ahead and, I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. Give me just a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so in the next example, we'll see how this gets really, really gnarly. And in column names, we're doing the same thing. We're using the untyped object. And all it's going to do is just bring back all of the names, which you see, top level names, which is what you see here, name and age. Okay? So let's switch over to the more complicated version over here. Let's just go ahead and run this. All right. So here you can see hello there. How may I assist you today? And so what I'm doing is I'm bringing back the more complicated, the most complicated one in this stack. And I wanted to give you an easy one and an extreme one, because this is where I run into frustration. I go online, I listen to videos, I read documentation. Everybody always takes you through the easy stuff. But in the real world, you're dealing with this kind of stuff or crap, and you can't get any help on it without going to the forums and giving examples, and then somebody up there knowledgeable is able to help you. But I like to try to, at least when possible, include both an easy one just to help you get your head around it. And then go really deep into the chaos in creating something like this to give you more of a real-world example of how you might use this. Okay, so I have got a crap load of stuff going on here. I'm going to format the text because it's probably going to be a lot easier to explain this. All right, so here is, let's collapse this down here to make this a little bit easier so that we get at least everything in one area. Okay, there's a couple different things I've got going on here. First, I'm trimming the full response when I get it back, okay? So if you notice, trim is the first thing there, or the outermost item. The reason I'm trimming is because you see this //n. Those are new line, and I don't want that. I simply just wanted to trim that out. And if you look at this text box, or if we try to look at this text box, I'm clicking, and for some reason it's not letting me select anything. Let's try to pick this here. Okay, cool. If we look at this, we can see that I've got a formatted text alignment to the middle, and then down here, vertical align is to the middle. And before I trimmed it, then what was happening is this was all the way down at the bottom, and I didn't want it there. I wanted it in the middle. So I threw this in here because sometimes you might get these funky, weird characters like I got, and if you don't understand what it is, then that's problem number one. But number two, this is what these types of videos are for, to kind of show you, again, these real-world scenarios. And so that's why I use trim, to trim out these new lines, okay? There's also a /T, and that's for like tab stops. You can replace tab stops with other things and use the replace function, but we're not going to get into that. We already have enough complication in this one alone. And so, come on, David. As we go down and look at this a little bit deeper, then what I'm doing is I'm using first. And first is used in this context because I need to make sure that I'm bringing back the very first record. Okay, so this might make a little bit more sense if I bring this over here. Let's see. Okay, so essentially when I run the code against this huge output, right, before I run the first function, this is what I'm getting back from the innermost column. Okay, let's go back to this function because this is the most internal. This guy right here, it's bringing back choices. So it's bringing back the parent layer. Again, this is the first layer right here, right? So this is the parent layer. And when I bring back the choices, if I were to look at this in a visual way, and it does help. And so what I did is I captured that off in a variable and I pasted it here in this, VS Code, just so that you can see what's going on. This is where I go into this in JSON. You really need to know what's happening in JSON. These curly brackets indicate a table, and these mustache curly braces indicate a record. So I only have one record here. Technically, it doesn't need to be in a table, but I can't control what it does when it does its untyped object. It throws it in a table and adds one record to it. And because of that, we have to deal with it. And it could bring back multiple records, and if it does, it needs to put it in a table. So essentially, that's why it's doing what it's doing. But because we know it's a table, this is why we're using the first. That way we can access the first record explicitly in that column or in that table. And let me rephrase, bringing back the first record in the table, even though there's only one record in that table. Sorry guys, I'm feeling a little under the weather and my head's foggy. And once we get back the record, the first record in the table, this is where I'm using the dot notation to dig in, to go and get the messages, which is layer 2, and then the content, which is layer 3. And then when I get that, I'm trimming it, as I told you earlier, and that is what's getting stored in the variable. So that's how you kind of read through this code here. And then again, same thing, column names, and I'm grabbing this from that massive ugly response that we get back from OpenAI, and it's only going to bring back the first columns. Notice that my index messages, and I do get choices because it is a parent, but I don't get role, I don't get content, so it only has to deal with those parent items. I hope this was as clear as I could possibly make it. I had to weave in a bunch of extra functions or items that we haven't covered just yet, but hopefully this gives you some value. Just let me know in the comments below, how well I did on this one, because I struggled with this one a little bit. At face value, it works, but it only works for those of you that have some base and foundational knowledge. Otherwise, this one could potentially be a brain twister for you. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you in the next video.